Hey folks, my name's Gary Daley and I am America's Deck Builder. We're here at a lumber yard in Simpsonville, South Carolina, where we're going to talk about the more advanced placement of the DuxxBak water shedding deck system. This is segment 2. If you haven't seen segment 1, I'd like you to go back and watch that and then come back and join us. In segment 1, we talked about a deck structure that was built to accommodate the DuxxBak system. In this segment, we've got an old existing deck that we're going to resurface with the DuxxBak. And because it's built in a traditional fashion with the ledger attached to the house and the joist running perpendicular to that, we need to alter the structure a bit so that we can accommodate the decking. Now remember, in segment 1 we talked about how the water runs off the decking in the direction of the deck boards. Well, since we have to run these across the decking, across the deck structure, and perpendicular to the joists, now we have to create a slope, minimum 1/8 inch per foot. We'd like a little bit more. If you can get 3/16, that's great, but we're going to work with 1/8 today. And we're going to start in the middle and slope the deck out. Now, because this is an existing structure, we're going to have to build this structure up a bit. So we're going to use shims to do that. Follow along. So the objective here is to create a crown rather than a peak. So what we've done is we've taken the length of the deck, 14 feet, and we've come to the middle, which is 7 feet. Since we need 1/8 inch per foot of slope to the end of the deck, well, we need 7/8 of an inch from the center to the end. So if we take the deck board and pull it up 7/8 of an inch, you can see that we don't have a peak here and it's a sudden drop straight down each side. Rather, it's a gentle slope. So that's what we're going to try to achieve. Now, if we were building a new structure, we could build it in that fashion. But because we're using an existing structure, we're going to need to measure each shim as we go along. So what we're going to do is, I've created my center shim already. I know that's 7/8 of an inch. Common thinking would say, oh, well, then this one's going to be 3/4, that one's going to be 5/8, that one's going to be half. And that would be a solid slope. We don't want that. Again, we want a crown. So we're going to stick our 7/8 inch under here, and we're going to use a straight edge. This straight edge is it's pretty rigid, but a little bit flexible. You could use a 3-inch PVC pipe or anything else you have on hand that isn't solidly rigid. That's going to allow that gentle slope. And we're going to pull it in here, and we're going to measure each one of our shims as we go out toward the end of the deck. Okay, so what I've done is I've taken my fairly rigid but kind of flexible straight edge. I've got my 7/8 shim under the center, and I've clamped it at both ends. And so I've created a nice gentle dome that's going to give me that 1/8 per foot slope from the center to the ends of the deck. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to measure each shim that I need to rip. And because this is an existing structure, remember, this is going to vary a lot. You know, common thinking would have us say, well, geez, we could just cut shims to accommodate. Well, if you have a new structure, you might be able to do that, but I still want you to clamp this straight edge on and measure each one. So I've got my handy dandy pink notepad here and a pen. I'm going to go from center to right and from center to left and write down each measurement. Okay, so we've ripped all of our shims. If you look here, you can see they're nice and snug, so we've got a good fit. I'm going to secure my shims either with screws or with finish nails. I prefer to screw everything together. It's never going to come apart, makes for a more solid structure. But we don't really have to worry too much about securing the shims to this permanently, to the joist permanently, because when we come in later with our decking, we're going to use a longer 2.5 inch finish screw to secure that down. And as you can see, that's going to secure everything real tight. The decking to the shim to the joist. Okay, so we've gone ahead and secured all of our shims with finished screws. We're ready to put some decking down. But before we do that, we want to prep our fascia. Now, I've tacked a piece of fascia here just temporarily for demonstration purposes. What you're going to do is you're going to make sure you've got this thing covered from one end to the other. And what we'll do is tack the fascia board up against the decking, and then we're going to scribe our slope on the back side of that fascia board. I've gone ahead and done that with this using a Sharpie, and I've come right down the length of the entire deck. Now I'm going to take that fascia board off and I'm going to cut that slope so that it fits nice underneath this piece. This piece is actually going to be our starter board out on the end, and is going to sit out over the fascia. What the fascia is going to do is it's going to conceal all these shims and that slope, and it's going to make for a nice finished appearance. Okay, with our fascia board trimmed, now we're ready to prep our starter board. This is going to be our starter board. Now, I want to have an inch overhang over the edge of the deck, over our fascia board, but I don't want to see this up underneath. So I'm going to rip this whole leg off using the table saw. I'm going to come right down just along that edge, and I'm going to leave that I-beam leg because that's where the strength of my decking is. After I rip it with a table saw, I'm going to route it over with a light sander, a belt sander, and make it look finished, make it look real pretty. Okay, I've gone ahead and prepped my starter board. I've ripped this leg completely off, and this is what I'm left with. So this is going to be the finished edge of my deck. So I'm going to go ahead and just hit this with a light belt sander up top and bottom to give a little bit of a finished appearance. And if there's any imperfections here, you can blend those in as well. Now, in order to install this, I want to measure back the width of the decking. And there are two ways to install this, depending on where we're going to place our fascia. We could either bring our fascia up alongside this. That's not the way I prefer to do it. I prefer to have my decking hanging out over. But I've placed two marks here so that we can talk about each system. If we're going to place our fascia up in front of everything, in front of the decking, then we just measure back the width of this deck board and snap a line there. If we're going to have it hanging out over, then I have to figure 1 inch overhang plus my 7/16 fascia. And so I take the 5 13/16 minus the 1 7/16. I ended up with 4 3/8. And that's where I marked here. So I've snapped a line at 4 3/8. As you can see, that gives me the overhang that I need. Okay, we've got our marks for our starter board. Now we're ready to secure the product. We're going to pull the board into place. We're going to get it right on our marks. And we're going to secure this down. Now for this application, with the shims, as we talked about before, we're going to be using the 2.5s exclusively. 2.5 inch trim head finish screw. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to secure the board on my mark all the way down in the center of the board so that my screw goes down into the rim joist, through the shim into the rim joist. Then I'm going to come and I'm going to, still using the 2.5s, I'm going to secure the board here at each joist. All right, with the first board secure, we're ready to start stacking our decking all the way across to the house. And as we've discussed in the original segment, we have to interlock our product. We're going to set it in and pull it tight. We're going to take our 2.5 inch screws and, holding this tight, lock it down. Now, I like to do every third or fourth one and then come back and fill in. It kind of gives me a good shakeout. But for this demonstration, we'll just go right down the line. Okay, as we work towards the house installing the decking, we've run into a rail post. And so now I'm going to talk a little bit about what we need to do to prep and make sure that we're watertight around the rail post so the water continues to shed off the deck. When we're going to trim our deck board around the post, and we have to maintain a 3/16 gap all the way around to allow for movement of the decking, expansion and contraction with variations in temperature. But another thing that we need to do is we need to introduce a bead of caulking into the groove of the product. Because we're going to cut around, we have to figure out some way to keep the water from falling down into the gutter, because we're going to cut into the gutter. So we're going to take some caulking and we're going to caulk right into the groove of the board. We're going to make sure we fill it up real good. We want to try not to get it up above though, because we really don't want to see it up above. And then we're going to take, and we're going to put the next board in, and we're going to have a nice seal there so that the water will run down across the board rather than down into the channel. All right, so I've gone ahead and marked out the cuts that I need to remove to get around my rail post. So as you can see, when I put these boards together, I'm going to cut this out, and it gives me that extra 3/16 all the way around so that it'll allow for expansion and contraction. It also gets me 3.5 inches past, so I've got my overhang there that I'm going to be looking for later. All right, I've gone ahead and cut out the notches for our post. Remember, they're 3/16 bigger all the way around. So I'm going to go ahead and install it now. I have to get past my post, bring it in, drop it in, make sure I'm tight against my groove. I got 3/16 both sides. I'm going to go ahead, screw it in, and then in preparation for the next piece, remember, we have to put a bead of caulking all the way down in this groove, a nice thick bead. Also remember that we only ever have to caulk an interrupted channel. So because this is going to be interrupted by the post, we got to seal it up so no water can get down into the gutter here. We don't have to apply adhesive anywhere else on the deck except on the flashing, but this is the only channel that we have to do. So we're not going to do it, but we're going to pretend we did it and put it into place, line it up, drop some screws in, and continue to work towards the house. Okay, we've come all the way across the deck towards the house, and we're up to our last piece. So we have to create a finish board, and we've created a faux house here against which we're going to install our board. You can see that we've got flashing here. It's out in front of the house wrap. You can do it out in front of the house wrap, or some building inspectors want it behind, whatever. We have flashing going down between the ledger and the house, and that's the effect. So I measured the distance from the last board to the house, and I'm going to subtract 3/16 from that, because remember, we always want a 3/16 gap whenever we're installing this stuff between any fixed structure and the deck board to allow for deck movement, expansion, and contraction. So this is the width that I've come up with, and for demonstration purposes, I'm going to show you how to install it. Now remember, we're going to have to run a bead of caulking down in here because this is an interrupted channel. The post is in the way. So we're going to caulk our full rip. We're going to set it in place, and we're going to drive a screw down. Now when we screw this in, you can see that this is an open cell. We want to make sure that we keep our screw as close as possible to this I-beam so that we don't collapse this cell. We want to try and maintain that integrity. So we're going to set it in, screw it down, and then we're going to flash over the top. Now with the flashing out over the top of the decking, remember, we don't want to bend it more than a 90 lest it should stick up later. So we want to bend it at about an 80, at about an 80. And then as we push it down and we caulk underneath, we can push it down and it's going to stay down. It's going to compress the caulking that we're going to put underneath there under the front edge. All right, so we've gone ahead and cut a longer piece of our finish board so I can show you how to install this. Now you can see that we've maintained a 3/16 inch gap between the house and the last piece, and that'll allow for expansion and contraction. We've gone ahead and filled this channel with caulking because this is an interrupted channel. That's going to keep the water up on top so it's not going to fall down in our gutter here. And now we're ready to flash this. We've got it flashing down between the ledger and the house. Now we need to flash so that any water that comes down outside the siding is going to wash out across the deck and be able to shed off the end of the deck. So I've notched this around my post. As you can see, I've got almost a 90. And I explained in the earlier segments why we don't want to go 90 or past. So before I install this, I want to run a bead of caulking about a 1/2 inch out in front of the cut all the way down along the house. Then I'm going to bring my flashing. I'm going to slide it down into place. I'm going to compress it so that that bead of caulking underneath is nice and squished. And I'm going to hit this with a hammer stapler to hold it into place. Then I'm going to come and I'm going to, as you saw in the previous segment, flash around my post. If I've done all this stuff just right, we're going to end up with a really nice watertight deck, no leaks whatsoever. All right, we've completed the decking. It's all the way across to the house. Everything's nice and watertight. So now we're ready to trim our ends. I wanted a 1 inch overhang, and I have a 7/16 inch trim board over which I want that 1 inch. So I've measured out 1 7/16 from the end of the structure, and I snapped a line. So I'm ready to go ahead and cut that. Get my safety glasses, rock and roll. one of the last things we need to do to finish this deck is to install our end caps. This is an end cap, and don't know if you can see it from there, but it's got an R right here. That means it's on the right side of the deck. There's some that say L. They go on the left side of the deck. It's pretty important that you read these things. This one's going to go on the right. It has the word up and an arrow. It has to go in this direction because there's reliefs here that will allow any moisture that might condensate in here to roll out uninterrupted. It's not going to build up inside. So once we've established we've got the right one, we're going to put it in place just like this. We're going to pop it in. You can either put some adhesive inside before you pop it in, or you can come up from the bottom with a trim nail or a stainless screw. Just make sure you don't come up through the top. You can see that we've got a little opening here. Any water that goes down through this channel is going out through the opening, through the weep hole. Okay, we've gone ahead and installed all of our end caps, and now we're ready to finish it with the fascia. If you remember back a couple steps, we cut our arc on the front and installed that fascia. And on this side, we're going to bring this piece in, hold it up tight, slide it back till it's nice and flush out front, put a couple screws in, and you can see what a nice finished deck we're going to have. Okay, so we've established how we're going to trim our deck with an overhanging decking. So we're going to bring the fascia up under the decking. Now I want to talk a little bit about a more advanced design, and I'd advise against this unless this is absolutely the way that your client wants your deck to be trimmed. One thing that we always have to maintain is water flow from every channel in this product, because condensation can build up in there. It's gonna have some way to escape. So if we're to take a trim board and come up and block that, well, guess what? That water's stuck and we're gonna have problems down the road. So we have to maintain drainage. Because the deck is sloped in this direction towards this end, I have to maintain these holes. And if you could see underneath this piece, you'd see that we still have these holes open here. Now, what I've created, I've just ripped some pieces from trim board and created spacers to set my actual trim board out away, so I'm not blocking up the holes. The spacers need to be installed here every 12 inches because we need our screws to be every 12 inches. We need 3 fasteners every 12 inches. So yeah, basically we kind of created a facade, a step out fascia that's going to allow the drainage to come down in behind. One of the primary components of that step out fascia is flashing. Because water will come back as it drains down. It'll come back underneath the surface of something. So we want this fascia to go in underneath the decking. So we've installed it here back underneath the decking on top of our rim joist, or our end joist, so that if water does roll back under, it's going to roll it out over. So that's the basic setup. And what we're going to do is we're going to take our trim board, and just like as we did before, we're going to make sure we're flush out on the end here, and we're going to fasten 3 screws every 12 inches. Or since we've got those spacers there, it might not be a bad idea to put a little pencil mark here so we know where they are. Okay, one more option for installing the DuxxBak deck system is a bigger deck. If this deck weren't 14 feet, but was rather 30 or 40 feet, we're going to need to incorporate 2 lengths of decking. And in order to do that and maintain a watertight product, we're going to need to incorporate our feature strip. So the first thing we need to do is build a box frame or install blocking in the center of our deck. And we're going to slope in the same dome fashion. We're going to slope out towards the ends of the deck so the water runs off and sheds properly. Once we've established the framing, the structure, then we're going to snap 2 lines. This width plus 3/4. That's going to give us 3/16 on each side. So we're going to snap 2 lines across the deck, up against which we're going to push our decking. So as we bring each decking piece in order to achieve that watertight that we're looking for, we're going to drop some caulking down in the channel. And what that's going to do is it's going to keep the wind from driving any water that can seep down in there back in underneath our leg here. So we're going to caulk that, bring the next piece in, set it in place. Caulk that, bring the next piece in, set it in place. And we're going to have it all in that line. On the other side, we're going to have these guys up against that line. Once we've got all of our decking laid out, And we've got that gap in here that again is this width plus 3/4. Now we're going to take our caulking, we're going to run a bead down this side as close to the edge as possible, and a bead down this side. We're going to take our feature strip, drop it in, and drive a row of screws down the center. It's secured. We won't have any water running up the middle because we've got our caulking down in there, and we won't have any water running back underneath because we've got our caulking here. Nice tight water seal. So we've completed building this beautiful deck, and now it's time to clean up. That's just what we're going to do here in Simpsonville, South Carolina. In the meantime, watch the full series of videos and learn how to install the stuff properly. You're going to end up with a beautiful deck too. From Simpsonville, I'm Gary Daley, and I am America's Deck Builder.